When two horror movie icons clash against each other, it's like a match made in heaven. Or in this case, we should say hell. 2003's Freddy vs. Jason may not be a cinematic masterpiece, but the journey to reach the big screen and the change in cinema that followed has had an impact, not only with horror movies, but with other franchises including both the MCU and DCEU. Let's journey back on the long road to create Freddy vs. Jason and the legacy the movie has created since its release. But before we begin, don't let Freddy Krueger haunt your nightmares because you missed another ScreenRant video. Slash that subscribe button like Jason would with his machete, and be sure to never miss out on great ScreenRant content. Let's face it, we're spoiled as moviegoers today. Cinematic universes, connected movies, and crossovers are not only a part of our weekly release calendar, but they have become the major focus of studios like Disney, Universal, and Sony. No longer are movies isolated to the 90 or so minutes we get to watch. We get to see Captain America team up with Thor and the other Avengers in at least 4 ensemble films. Batman gets to clash against Superman until they bond over their mothers and help form the Justice League. And now there's even King Kong escaping the wrath of Skull Island to take on the mega beast known as Godzilla. And all of these franchises truly have one movie to thank. New Line's Freddy vs. Jason. No, we're not kidding. Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees each built their own movie franchises over the years, filled with some classic moments, along with some duds, but everything truly culminating in the ultimate battle as Freddy took on Jason in a huge crossover movie. Pitting two of the biggest horror movie icons against each other seems like a no-brainer, but things weren't as simple as tossing on a hockey mask or sharpening a set of deadly knives. The on-screen war between Freddy and Jason may have culminated in a box office success and changed cinema forever, but the journey there was nearly 20 years in the making, and a true nightmare for many involved. Hints of Freddy going to war with Jason were conceptualized very early on, and over a decade before the final film was even released. The competing horror movies often referenced each other with small moments and Easter eggs. In 1986, Jason Lives, Friday the 13th Part 6, there is a young girl named Nancy who suffers from nightmares. Sounds similar to the original Nancy from the original Nightmare series? In Nightmare on Elm Street 4, there is a pet dog named Jason, clearly named after the camp killer. With both franchises at their peak and interest full-blown from fans, people all over the world were ready to see the knife-fingered glove take on the bloody machete in an epic showdown. But things weren't so simple. As the sequels began spreading the slasher concept too thin, movie executives were looking for a way to freshen things up, and they began listening to fans who wanted to see a Freddy vs. Jason movie way back in 1987. You'd think one of the biggest obstacles of bringing the horror icons together is Freddy's entrapment in hell, but it was actually the production companies behind the films. The Nightmare on Elm Street franchise was owned by New Line Cinema, while Paramount Pictures retained the rights to Friday the 13th. Both companies desperately wanted to retain creative control. Eventually, the concept was dropped as neither side came to an agreement and each franchise moved on. Instead of taking on Freddy Krueger, Jason moped around the streets of Manhattan in a poorly received sequel that nearly derailed the whole franchise. With waning interest in the hockey mask killer, Paramount Pictures did what no one thought would happen and sold the rights to the character, allowing the opportunity for New Line Cinema to swoop in and take control. And this is exactly what they did. Camp Crystal Lake wouldn't be shuttered for good. While Wes Craven's New Nightmare was getting produced in the early 90s, the story of Jason Voorhees took an entirely different direction in the form of Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday. The movie itself was unremarkable and featured a crazy story about the spirit/slug form of Jason possessing others, but the last 10 seconds of the movie got everyone talking. Back in the 90s, it was worth the Blockbuster video rental alone just to skip past the entire movie and watch that final scene. Jason gets dragged to hell, but he leaves his hockey mask behind. As the earth moves, Freddy Krueger's gloved hand bursts out of the ground and drags the mask down. Paired with Freddy's iconic laugh, moviegoers finally got the first glimpse of the future battle between the two titans. The unadvertised twist ending was a true shocker for those who saw the film, but sadly the ultimate teaser was released a long 10 years before Freddy vs. Jason finally hit the big screen. New Line was desperately trying to put the project together. More than 7 scripts and treatments were commissioned, each one offering a different take on how to combine the nightmares of Freddy with the camp hauntings of Jason, and some of the ideas were pretty far out there. Yes, a little bit crazier than Jason wreaking havoc on a space station. Man, what a fun movie. Some ideas included Freddy as a Camp Crystal Lake counselor who was the one who drowned Jason. Others featured the Voorhees parents as part of the mob who burned Freddy and killed him. Retconning the entire history of the characters clearly wasn't going to work. The screenplay that was eventually greenlit came from screenwriters Mark Swift and Damian Shannon. Swift and Shannon wrote an epic 2-hour journey between the characters, but New Line insisted the story be slashed down to around 95 minutes. The chosen story stayed pretty true to both franchises' origin stories. In the town of Springwood, teenagers were forced to take sleeping medications to help prevent the onset of dreams or nightmares, without anybody fearing Freddy, who was trapped in hell, unable to haunt his victims. The solution? The wise-mouthed killer awakens Voorhees from his lake slumber and sends him to Springwood to do the killing for him. Of course, when Jason's body count begins adding up and Freddy loses kills, Krueger becomes jealous, and the real feud begins. Simple and to the point. The plot offered up the easiest way for the horror icons to meet and allowed for plenty of hopeless teenage victims along the way. Knowing the hype and fan fever surrounding the film, New Line decided to push the movie as a summer blockbuster rather than an early fall or Halloween release like many big horror movies like to bank on. Scheduled for August of 2003, a lot was riding on Freddy vs. Jason, and not just in terms of the horror characters, but for movies in general. Of course, Robert Englund would return as the iconic Freddy Krueger. The actor chosen for the role of Jason had some pretty big shoes to fill. really big shoes to fill. Looking for a taller and leaner Jason who could tower over Freddy, New Line and director Ronnie Yu decided on Ken Kersinger, a stuntman who previously worked on Jason Takes Manhattan. Many die-hard horror fans saw the exclusion of longtime Jason actor Kane Hodder as a major blow to the production, but Kersinger played a great version of Jason that stuck to the roots of the character. The screenplay was written, the cast was hired, and the director was good to go. It was finally happening. Freddy vs. Jason was going to reach the big screen, and New Line was making a big deal out of it. Let's take a journey back to August 15th, 2003, because Jason and Freddy were not just up against each other, but some other box office entries looking to take the top spot. Thankfully, the August movie season was as dead as their victims, because there was very little competition in the theaters. Freddy vs. Jason was not only the single major horror release in August, it was the only wide horror release since 28 Days Later back in the end of June. Fans were practically begging for scares at this point, and New Line took major advantage. Freddy vs. Jason laughed in the face of other competition on the weekend, including the comedy Uptown Girls and Kevin Costner's Western Open Range. Well, if this was a shootout, then Freddy vs. Jason won hands down. In the United States alone, the opening weekend of the R-rated Freddy vs. Jason grossed an impressive $36 million, far more than any other Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th film. The opening weekend numbers and extended box office over the following weeks proved the movie went beyond the gimmicky title and was a viable franchise with some possible room to grow. Still, today, when ranked among the top R-rated horror films, Freddy vs. Jason is in the top 25 and holds the number 4 spot for slashers, only sitting behind the original Scream trilogy. Box office numbers are one thing, but how does the movie itself hold up? Critics are never friendly to horror films, and like many others in the series, the movie was lambasted by the best of them, and they weren't all wrong. Despite the creative nature of the crossover film, there was a lot of exposition to help catch new fans up to speed on each franchise, and some odd special effects decisions. We've seen Freddy Krueger transform into all kinds of things before, but a pot-smoking caterpillar seemed a little too over the top. And when Jason gets tortured in Freddy's boiler room, the pinball sound effects were a bit much, although hilarious. But everything wrong in the build-up is forgiven for the final 20 minutes of the movie, when the characters return to Camp Crystal Lake and the true showdown begins. It's here where director Ronnie Yu, Robert Englund, and the rest of the cast really deliver on the action and final fight. The ending itself went under a lot of scrutiny, debates, and rewrites while the film was actually shooting. At one point early on, the arrival of Pinhead from the HELLRAISER series was considered, but rights to the character could not be obtained. After both characters end up in the lake, the final moments of the film show Jason slowly walking out of the water, carrying Freddy's decapitated head in his hand. Freddy then turns to the camera and delivers a wink, telling us the battle between them is far from over. And here we are now, celebrating 15 years later and learning what an impact Freddy vs. Jason has had on the film industry. The success of the crossover has led to many others. In the immediate years that followed, sci-fi fans got to enjoy 2 Alien vs. Predator films, along with the 2004 B-movie Clash of the Puppet Master vs. the Demonic Toys. While the rest of Hollywood moved on, Freddy vs. Jason proved to mark the end of the era for 2 major horror franchises. Robert Englund hung up his glove, burned his hat, and tucked away the striped sweater, never to return to the role again. The Friday the 13th legacy was completely rebooted with a new movie in 2009. It was also a box office success, but didn't lead to any sequels. The one-and-done reboot curse also hit Nightmare on Elm Street, as the new vision tried to go darker and scarier than ever, with Jackie Earle Haley stepping into the role of Krueger. With movie studios so trigger-happy to greenlight horror sequels, how come we never saw a sequel to Freddy vs. Jason? The short answer is, we were supposed to. And the sequel would have included another epic crossover with Bruce Campbell's Ash from the Evil Dead franchise. Rumors have swirled about why Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash never made it to the big screen, but the continued adventures did get an official release in the form of a comic book. The 6-issue miniseries is a direct sequel to Freddy vs. Jason and features several returning characters. Horror franchises were not the only ones to notice the success of Freddy vs. Jason. Fans flocked to see two big screen favorites mix it up on the big screen, and Marvel definitely took notice. At first glance, you may not see a lot of similarities between Freddy vs. Jason and the Avengers, but Marvel used New Line's blueprints and blew it up to epic proportions. Sure, Freddy vs. Jason may be considered a horror movie, but it has a comic book style written all over it. Ron A.U. delivered a lot of fan service to viewers, showcasing iconic weapons, homages to past kills, and delivered plenty of classic Freddy Krueger quotes. The movie even brought back Jason's dead mother, a great callback to the early Friday the 13th films. This same fan service is what we love about Marvel and DC movies, like when Thanos snaps his fingers to recreate the iconic comic book moment. Freddy vs. Jason was just a tease at crossing universes and allowed Marvel Studios to take the risk and build their universe, starting first with 2008's Iron Man and moving on to other heroes before the first Avengers movie in 2012. The DCEU was also established on this notion and even used the same title style when releasing Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The DC film flipped the page on Freddy vs. Jason, while New Line's horror romp featured two villains going at each other. Batman vs. Superman put the heroes at odds. And just because New Line let the Freddy and Jason franchise die doesn't mean they let go of the whole shared universe idea. Enter The Conjuring. When it comes to shared universes and cinematic crossovers, this is where the true legacy of Freddy vs. Jason lies. The Conjuring universe has branched out and included crossover successes like Annabelle and The Nun. With massive box office numbers and a third Conjuring film set for release in 2019, the Conjuring universe shows no sign of stopping and represents exactly what Freddy vs. Jason aimed to be. Now, other horror franchises are getting in on the mix, reaching into back catalogs and creating cinematic universes that we never expected. Case in point, M. Night Shyamalan's Split. The shocking twist ending to the movie connected the story to his previous film Unbreakable and has led to a direct sequel entitled Glass. Just because New Line has moved on from the Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th franchises doesn't mean Freddy vs. Jason is forgotten. Far from it, in fact. To help celebrate the film's 15th anniversary release, there has been a slew of merchandise dedicated to the film. Freddy may be dead, but the hype and celebration of the film isn't going to the grave anytime soon. No matter whether you loved or hated Freddy vs. Jason, you can't deny the impact the movie has had on the industry as a whole. It culminated the end of a great slasher era and ushered a whole new era of crossovers and cinematic universes that continue to dominate the box office today. If either franchise does return, expect some major future story setups as companies try to establish another horror universe, much like Freddy vs. Jason first attempted to do. So, as you flip through the cable channels and see Freddy vs. Jason airing for the umpteenth time, stop for a moment, watch some scenes, and appreciate the true impact and legacy of Freddy vs. Jason. Were you a fan of Freddy vs. Jason or the original slasher series? How do you think the films impacted the horror genre and the shared universes as a whole? Should Freddy return to the big screen? Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to ScreenRant on YouTube so you can stay up to date with our awesome videos. Thanks for watching.